So welcome everyone. I want to dedicate the class to this little baby here. Maybe you want to show the baby in the camera? Or you'd rather not? Keep him away from the superficial world as long as you can. Gavriel Zalman Levine, son of Jeff and Rachel, who was just born a week ago. His bris was this past Friday. Born Erev Rosh Chodesh Tammuz. So I feel personally gratified, besides a new life in this world, also because I met Jeff when he was 17 years old, at least 30 years ago, right?
I thought it was more like 2 or 3.
Time flies when you're having fun. And so the Talmud tells us that when a child is in its mother's womb, it's taught the entire Torah. And after that, it's all downhill from there. Because upon birth, we're made to forget. And then as Chassidus teaches, what's the point of teaching somebody something and then make them forget? The point is because only the conscious mind forgets. The unconscious mind remains aware. And it's like that type of resonating experience where you hear a song or you hear something or you see something that resonates and you don't know quite where you heard or saw it. Is it all right? Is it all right? There should be no preview. Is it streaming now?
It's streaming, yeah.
So what do you mean shut the preview?
There's the top one and the bottom one. I'm hearing both signs at the same time. The second one is later.
Do you press start streaming?
Yeah.
Is it streaming now?
Yeah.
We'll leave it be. Let's see. Maybe Jeff can look at it. Check it out, Jeff. And this is true for all of us. This is just the more healthy version of all of us, this little child. Like they say in technology, the version 2, version 3 is better than version 1. When it comes to children, it's the other way around. That the earlier in our lives, the less jaded we are and the less polluted by the toxins of life. So, we dedicate it to Gavriel Zalman, and the topic this evening is Avenging Jewish blood. What Jews can teach the entire world. Obviously, it's pretty obvious why I'm discussing this, because just a few weeks ago, which is now escalated into what's happening in Israel. Just a few weeks ago, there was the kidnapping, the tragic kidnapping, and then even more tragic death and murder of these 3 young boys, students, which has resonated and touched a chord in many of us, simply due to the fact, I believe, as students, innocent blood. And then, sadly, we've also seen the calling for avenging that innocent blood, and tragically a little Palestinian boy was killed, murdered. So the topic is clearly on people's minds. What is the Jewish approach? Is that acceptable? Vengeance. And what is the way we approach it? Gandhi's approach, which was peaceful resistance, that even when you're being shot at, you're being killed, never fight fire with fire, never fight death with death. Is that the Jewish approach? Is that the other extreme? Or is it that we do have vengeance and we go to war or we go and avenge blood? Is that our approach? Which really is one that goes back to long history. If you're familiar with the Code of Hammurabi, and there was the concept of retaliation, which became part of culture and civilization almost from the earliest stages in history through thousands of years. And even today, you see many nations, civilizations, especially in the East, the Eastern world, as well as Africa, are driven by tribal feuds and vendettas that go generations and generations. Look at the Shiites and the Sunnis and other civil wars that are taking place in the Middle East. For some Americans, it's hard to understand, but the fact of the matter is, a big part of this world is very religious, and either due to religion or cultural or other factors, there are forces at work that go deeper and absolutely vengeance was an absolutely acceptable approach as I said, for millennia, where you look at the stories of ancient Greece, ancient Rome, all those nations and their empires, when one nation perpetrated atrocities against another, what was the first thing that the nation that came to power did? Vengeance. They went back to those that hurt them, and they exacted to them even worse than what was done to them. This is common behavior till modern age, maybe. And even today, it's true that many countries may not do that, but perhaps they do it in different ways. So what is the Torah and Jewish approach to a topic like this? And obviously it also applies to us personally. I'm sure some people have hurt us, and many of us just have our blood boiling where we'd like to get even, where we'd like to see the person who hurt us be hurt. Even if our minds tell us that we won't be healed through that, and it won't necessarily help us, but there is a certain type of primal force inside of us that we feel that some people call it justice, but it ends up being what's called nakama, vengeance. Idea of avenging something that was done to us in a horrible way, that the person who did that deserves to be punished in kind. In the concept of eye for an eye, which is part of the Code of Hammurabi, the truth is, however, in Judaism, the eye for an eye, ayin tachas ayin, shein tachas shein, tooth for a tooth. If you read it clearly, it doesn't say ayin tachas ayin means the eye for the value of an eye, as the Talmud explains. In Judaism, there's no such concept of knocking out, God forbid, an eye for someone that knocked out an eye. It doesn't work that way, because you're not allowed to maim a person. You have to repay in some type of monetary value, different ways to calculate that. The damage is done. So it's not a life for a life or an eye for an eye. You don't have that concept in Judaism. But you do have it, as I said, in many cultures that continue to still affect the world as it is today. So, as I said, both on a macrocosm level, which is nations, and on a personal level, it's a very important question. How do we deal with things like this? How do we deal when we are personally hurt? Is it justified for us to just want and desire that the other person who hurt us be hurt in kind, even if it doesn't, we gain nothing from that? So obviously most of us understand, especially when you're not in the throes of the passionate moment, that's probably not exactly a healthy attitude to just enjoy when another person is hurt, even though they may have hurt you. But at the same time, many of us do stoop at times to our lowest common denominator, and our base instincts often feel that way. Who at times wouldn't like to, once you read some Holocaust stories or hear about how they dehumanized and killed innocent Jews and children and so on. So you can't really say that you wouldn't have any glee if you found out that a Nazi suffered in kind. Doesn't mean necessarily that we have to be the ones that exact that suffering, but there is that element. So I want to address this as comprehensively as I can in the time allotted here, the time that you allow me until your curfews. That is, even though in New York there's no curfew, but even people in New York sleep at times. So address it in somewhat of a way that really, I think, as often is quite surprising and disarming when you really look at the Jewish sources, how advanced Torah was, especially compared to the cannibalism that was taking place at the same time that the Torah was being given at Sinai. The humane nature of Torah. So there is absolutely, first of all, let's start with this, that the Torah clearly states that it's prohibited to just want vengeance. You should not want vengeance. Vengeance is not considered a virtue under any circumstance. And vengeance should be distinguished from justice. We're not talking about justice. Criminal is a criminal. Even if the crime wasn't done to you, if you're a person that loves justice, oyev tzedakah mishpat, justice and kindness, so it's nothing to do with you. It's to do with justice has to be served. So the first thing is the idea of vengeance is not a Jewish concept. Even though, as I'll soon address, you find words called vengeance, you find it in this week's chapter, you find it in next week's chapter. I'll discuss that in a few moments. But the concept, and there are many verses that attest to the fact that a person should not enjoy or have pleasure in the kama. Kama is considered a vice, having avenging or vengeance in any given way. As I said, justice is another story. The second factor here, this has nothing to do with us personally. Any emotion that is elicited because of our subjective reasons is always suspicious. Because it could be that someone hurt you, suddenly you want vengeance. Someone hurt someone else, it doesn't bother you. What does that say? That's a selfish experience. Now, I understand we're entitled to our pain and we're entitled to be subjective, but to make a statement that vengeance is good because it hurt me and when someone else is hurt, I don't really care, clearly something's wrong if you have that attitude. Justice is something that God created a just world, and a person who's committed to ethical and moral standards would want to have justice no matter who was hurt. Not only if it's yourself or your family, even if it's a stranger. So it's very different than pure vengeance. So then why do we have words like nikmas Hashem, nokem nikmas Hashem, like we have this week, Pinchas? So what does he do? It says when Zimri desecrated and defiled, Zimri was a leader of a tribe, and he went and, in a public way, had sexual relations with one of the Midianite women, which was part of the plot of Bilam, last week's chapter, to defeat the Jews. So Pinchas, without asking questions, like a zealot, went and pierced, stabbed, speared both Zimri and the woman. And God says to him in this week's chapter, says, because you avenged my honor, I give you what? Brisi Shalom, my covenant of peace. Which right there should immediately tell us there's something going on here. Why would you give peace to someone who behaves like a zealot who just murdered 2 people? Don't say murdered, fine. He had a justification. So clearly, it's more complicated than just plain vengeance. Also, we're not talking about the vengeance of the person. We're talking about God's vengeance. So there's plenty of discussion about this. First of all, God is not human, and anthropomorphic terms don't apply to God. So what does it mean, God's vengeance? In next week's chapter, we have a similar concept with the Midianites. It says, Nokem Nikmas Midian, that he took vengeance and avenging against Midian. So the explanation briefly, which is really not so much a subject, but I just want to qualify it. Vengeance in the human terms, Dibra Torah B'Lashon B'nei Adam, the Torah speaks in the language of the human being. So sometimes we have words like God was angry, or God saw, God heard. So there's entire discussions starting from the Guide of the Perplexed from Maimonides and other books that discuss, since we can't apply anthropomorphism, which means human terms, to God, we have no choice, so we use metaphors. So when we say God saw, we're saying, like we perceive something with our eyes, God has a way of perceiving things. The way the Kabbalists actually put it is that you can't say he sees like we see, but you can't say he doesn't see either. So there's no other way to use it. So it's like saying he doesn't not see, if you follow what I'm saying. It's called Yedias Hashlil. So you can't say God is wise, so you say, but you can't say he's not wise. So you say he's not wise. That's basically as you abstract the ideas. It's not, as I said, this is a little somewhat digressing. I just want to make the point that, so all these ideas of anger or vengeance and so on have a completely different meaning when you're speaking on a divine level. There's the concept of desecrating God. Desecrating God is called a Chil Hashem. Chil Hashem is essentially when the most basic example that we have, unfortunately, in our times, when you see a person who seems to be devout, dresses a certain way, and seems to project an image of piety, behave in a very impious way, that's a Chil Hashem. Because here people are looking at this person to be a symbol, an example, a role model of what God wants us to be like. And when they behave the opposite way, it's a Chil Hashem. You could say, why is there a double standard? And what about a person walking down the street that doesn't look pious? They could behave immorally. No, they also can't. But you don't have the aspect of desecration. You have the aspect of just being immoral, which no one is justified. So you have in the Talmud stories, and one example, Reb Chia, I believe it was, one of the sages, when he would buy meat at the butcher, he would never buy on credit, because he was known as a sage and a scholar in his time, as a role model, and he didn't want anyone to have the impression, Marasayan, that he may be buying meat without paying for it. So even though the owner is giving him the credit, but because someone may be watching from outside or may not notice, they may see that Reb Chia, the great sage, is taking meat without paying. So he was extra careful. Even though credit, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. I mean, and you can go check. Why would you suspect maybe he is buying on credit? But because someone who's in the public eye, so to speak, and this light is shining on him, the light has higher obligations called desecrating. Moses, of course, was the ultimate. Moses was the greatest of the great. What did Moses do that was his greatest sin? Which, if you think about it, it's almost a mitzvah compared to us. That when God told him to to speak to the stone in order to draw water from it, and instead he hit the stone, this was considered a desecration, and because of that, Moses does not end up in Israel. Imagine, what's the big sin here? The first time, if you know the entire episode, God tells him to hit the stone when the Jews left Egypt. And now he tried to hit now God tells him, speak to the stone. So he spoke to the stone. The stone was not giving water. So Moses thought to himself, God, last time he told me to hit the stone, so I'll hit the stone. Let's be honest. If you have no faith, hitting a stone and speaking to a stone is equal miracle. Stones don't give water. So if Moses said, what are you telling me? A stone doesn't give water. Why are you telling me that I can get water out of the stone? He didn't do that. He hit the stone. But this small change, because the people heard Moses hear from God speak, and instead of speaking, he struck the stone, that change on the level of Moses is considered to be a grave sin. Because they said, if Moses can change one little thing, then I can do much more, which is a common issue. That your teacher has to do double, because you're always going to say, hey, he's on a higher level or she's on a higher level, so I could always do 50%. There's an expression the Talmud says, a ravav, a piece of dust, or a soil, on a garment of a scholar is considered a big desecration. Why? On another person's suit or a garment, it's not a big thing. Because again, a person who's on a pedestal, people are looking up to, yes, the standard is higher, and therefore the desecration is greater. Think of the Jigan, the Jewish, Yiddish comedians, the Jewish theory of relativity, he says, goes like this. 3 hairs on your head isn't much, but 3 hairs in the soup, So a piece of dust on your eyeball is very irritating. A piece of dust on your finger is meaningless. Because when you're dealing with something that's extremely subtle or refined, just a drop of one dust is already a big thing. So it all depends, it's relative. So even though mitzvahs in Judaism in general are not relative, Shabbos, Kashrut, other things, are all obligated to the same extent. But this Chil Hashem is absolutely relative, all depending on the perception that people have. So going back to the topic, therefore, was the idea of vengeance of God is exactly that. It's not some vengeance. God is jealous of the Midianites or of Zimri. Why would God be jealous? We're talking about a God that's completely superior and beyond any comparison to anything human. So the concept of vengeance doesn't even make sense. Vengeance, humans, we're on the same level. So you hurt me, I could have maybe a tinge of avenging what you did to me. But in God, that language doesn't fit. Why would God? What kind of vengeance is there? So explanation is it's not vengeance; it's about desecration. And it's not, you're not doing it for God; you're actually doing it for us. Like for example, take the grave sin of the idolatry, and then I'll get back to the actual topic. Why would God care? Human beings want to be foolish and want to bow to a stone or to a piece of wood, a tree, or to the sun or the moon or the stars. So let them let them serve. Who cares? They want to be foolish. Is God jealous of the tree? Competition of who's made the real God stand up? The answer is very simple. It's nothing to do with God. It's to do with us. Once you begin worshiping things that are not real gods, then basically you're just worshiping an extension of yourself. And that's a contradiction to the whole concept of what a God is about. God is meant to be something beyond your ego and your subjective self to rise to something greater. And once you start saying, no, I can't relate to that God because he's invisible, I want a God on my terms, one I could see in the sky, or on my wall, or on my mountain, or my cathedral. Once that, then you're no longer worshiping. The whole point of God is defeated. You will never find truth that way because you want truth on your terms. And the whole idea of a God is a truth on higher terms. That's the brief response. And the same is true with when you say the avenging God. What Pinchas did was a Kiddush Hashem. He saw that a leader in Israel, one of the great leaders, Zimri, desecrated God in the most terrible way. So there's a whole discussion what entitled him to do it. How is he able to do it without due process? Is there such a thing as lynch mobs? And Judaism, absolutely not. That's why you do not find any vigilante and zealotry in Judaism. It's completely rejected. But that's another discussion. If you want more on that topic, I've written about it at length. What gave Pinchas the right to do it? I'm addressing here the issue of the words nekama. That doesn't mean vengeance at all. It's just a metaphor for the idea of preserving the honor of God, or the honor of God's standards, which was, of course, a great mitzvah that he did. The point here was not, and this did not open a way that anyone can just go and become a vigilante and kill anyone they think is not doing it with God. This is a one-time exception that never happened again, and it was never seen as a license. I'm just qualifying it so don't misunderstand the episode of this week's chapter. That's why it was Pinchas that did it. Pinchas was a peaceful man. Pinchas was not known as an aggressive person. That's why when God says to him, I'll give you the covenant of peace, because Pinchas didn't do it out of aggression. He did it out of care, out of love. It would be like someone desecrating the worst possible way. It did not come from an angry place, which is basically the real, getting back to the topic, the real reason why any type of feeling like hate or vengeance or grudges or vendettas are not acceptable in Judaism, because that's about you. It has nothing to do with the truth. You were hurt, so you feel violated, and you're angry. I'm not suggesting that we don't get angry. We are human beings, but Judaism teaches us a higher standard, as I shall elaborate on soon, which is that to distinguish between your weakness and what is correct. So fine, we all make our mistakes. Somebody insults you, and you don't think about it too much, you insult them in return, and tomorrow, the next day, you regret why you said what you said. Not because you're justifying what they did, because you say, maybe I should have dealt with it differently, which is what we're going to address. Because Judaism also does not take the Gandhi-like approach where we turn the other cheek. That's also not Judaism. We absolutely do go to war in self-defense. We do stand up for honor. We do take action. The question is, what type of action? So going back to the topic at hand, what Torah generally teaches us is to distinguish between your own feelings about something and what is right. It's a very big difference. And it's critical in every area of communication and relationships. Take shalom bias issues between husband and wife, spouses, marital discord or marital harmony. So there's going to be differences. There's no way that two people coming from different families and different persuasions and different Ein Deis Ein Shavas, have different minds and different opinions, are going to have at times a conflict. The question is, if you find there's no conflict in a marriage or in any relationship between good friends, there's something wrong. There has to be conflict. How could two people agree about everything? We can't even agree with ourselves about everything. You probably have conflicts in yourself about the same matter. You could have a conflict and fight with yourself. So that's inevitable, and that's the way it was meant to be. The question is what you do when there's a conflict. How do you deal with it? So it either can escalate into to hostility and get worse and worse, God forbid, or you know how to deal with it. What is the first step in any type of conflict management or mediation? Is to get two people to just not be 100% right. Where I say, I don't even want to sit in the room with the other person. You know that one. I don't even want to sit with that person. Well, one second. If you're so right, why are you afraid sitting with that person? So you say, because they did the worst possible thing. They're closed-minded and they're this. Whenever I hear that, you always, of course, throw it back subtly and say, what about you? You're the most open-minded person on earth, and that person is the most closed-minded person? Is that you coming from an objective place, you're saying that? You get an objective opinion, or that's your opinion? Your subjective opinion is that the other person is more subjective than you are. Okay? Now, if you could even have a conversation with someone about that, we're already in good shape. But the point I'm trying to make is, the first step in any mediation is simply to be able to have one person not agree with the other. Just know that there's another person sitting in the room, and let's hear two people speak. Why does another person have to be wrong for you to be right, if you're so secure with your position? Which, of course, as a tangentially, one of the main reasons people cannot find mediation is not because there's no common ground, because they're not secure with their position. The only way to be sure is by making sure the other person is wrong. So they're not open to some third approach. So the point I'm making here is that the first step is to recognize that we are all subjective human beings. And as such, we're blinded. The Torah makes a very powerful statement when it says, HaSheichid Ya'aver Einei Chachamim Salav Divrei Tzadikim. Chapter Shoftim, the Torah says in Deuteronomy that Sheichid, which literally means a bribe, can be bias. Any form of bias blinds the eyes of the wise and distorts the tongue, divrei, the words of tzaddikim, of the righteous. So the obvious question is this. When the Torah designates and calls someone chachamim, a wise person, wise people, or tzaddikim, it's not a euphemism. It means the Torah is calling this person a wise person. That's a pretty big compliment. And a tzaddik. So how could a wise person and a tzaddik get distorted by or blinded by bias? That's exactly what the Torah is coming to tell us. That there's no one immune. There's no such person. There's no such thing on this earth. Even the greatest tzaddik or the greatest chacham, the wisest or the most righteous person, that is immune from bias. Even the great Moses recused himself when there was something related to his brother or family member, because subtly all of us are capable of bias. Adam karav etzel atzmei. The nature of the beast, the nature of the human being, the way God created us, is that we see ourselves differently than we see everyone else. There's no way you can see others as you see yourself. Another expression, kol negoy adam, a person sees all blemishes except negoy, except his own blemishes. You see a fault in someone else that you may have 10 times stronger, but you'll not see it on yourself as much as you see it in someone else. Some people even argue psychologically the reason we see faults in others is because we have them ourselves. We wouldn't see them if we didn't have them. And that's what makes you so upset, because instead of looking at yourself, you just project it on someone else. But regardless of that point, the fact of the matter is we are avas atzmei, self-love is part of reality. No one says it's even a bad thing. When does it become a root of problems? When you deny it. When you say, no, I'm objective in this situation. Yes, I could be biased, but in this situation I'm objective. When you're not necessarily so. So the first step to truth is acknowledgement. We're not looking for perfection. They say in all healing, talk about trust. Trust is not built on perfection. It's built on accountability. If you expect your friend, your partner, your spouse to be perfect, you're in for a total disappointment. It's impossible. No one is perfect. But if you expect accountability, that's where you build trust. Not that often you'll find unrealistic expectations, especially people who've been hurt in relationships or hurt as children. One of the things is you want perfection. You want someone who finally will never betray you, will never abandon you. That is not realistic, because people make mistakes, deliberate, intentional, not intentional. What you want is accountability, because the worst possible thing is not a crime, but the silence and the cover-up after the crime. As they say, the silence is worse than the rape. Because, a crime is a crime, as bad as it may be, but at least you have an outlet. You can say, a crime was perpetrated, I was violated, I was hurt, and now I want justice, or I want to heal. But let's say someone cuts you, God forbid, or you cut yourself, and they say, no, nothing happened. There's no cut, there's no wound, there's no pain. That's the worst thing, because you're not even not allowed to validate your own dignity. And that is far, far worse than the original crime. Not worse necessarily than the crime, obviously, than the gravity of the crime, but worse in its impact, because then there's no healing. It's like nothing happened. Everything is great. When you know deep inside something happened. You look at the effects on children who were told repeatedly there was no abuse. Far, far, almost, I can't say impossible, because there's no impossible, very difficult, because that child then develops a whole attitude that is a lie. There absolutely was a problem. And when people say, no, everything is fine, everything is cool. So, awareness is half, they say, yedias hamachla chetzi refuah. The awareness of a problem, of an illness, is half the cure. This is the first step in any mediation, any conflict management, and so on. So the fact that we have feelings, whether it's anger, a grudge, or vengeance, and so on, no one says human beings are immune to it. We will have such feelings in our lives. The question is, do you check it? Or do you just accept it? And checking it means you look at it and say, is this the right thing I should be doing? And is it even helpful? And I can tell you from personal experience, when I say personal, thank God, not myself personal, but people I've met, I know people who spend, half their lifetimes just to make that another person should suffer, because they will cause suffering. How much energy they expend in feelings, in their anger, carrying the anger, carrying vengeance, and even if it's justified. But what happens is you get destroyed in the process. You're destroyed by what someone did to you because you can't free yourself. because you want that person to suffer. You want that person to be called to justice. So the feeling is a legitimate one, but that it consumes your life, that's not legitimate, because then that person is continuously murdering you. They're occupying your real estate of your mind and your heart and not letting you live your life. This is very difficult when a person is in the throes of such type of vengeance or anger or grudge or whatever you want to call it. It's very difficult to free them because they don't see it. They just see justice. I can't believe that person still can go to shul and get honored or something else like that. And I'm not suggesting, God forbid, in any way that person should be forgiven or forgotten. The question is, what does it do to you? I mentioned a number of times the concept of forgiveness. In Hebrew, the word for forgiveness is mechila. Mechila is forgiveness. I forgive. And the laws, there's actually a whole section in Shulchan Aruch, in Code of Jewish law, based on the Talmud. It's placed right before Yom Kippur, the laws of Erev Yom Kippur, that talk about Hilchas Mechila. Because Yom Kippur is a day when we are absolved, and we should absolve everyone else. Obviously, God cannot forgive what another person has done to us. God can only forgive that was between God and man. So there's a mitzvah, that before Yom Kippur, all year round is fine, but before Yom Kippur especially, one should go and request forgiveness for someone that hurt you, that you may have hurt. And it's interesting laws. Without going into all the details, I've discussed this at length in previous classes and other classes, but there's some very interesting. The obligation is twofold, both on the person that did the wrong and the person who was wronged. The one who did the wrong obviously is obligated to acknowledge and actually present, and not through a messenger, not through third parties, directly ask for forgiveness. And not just lip service, but actually sincerely mean it. And the one who is wrong has an actual obligation to forgive. Now, this isn't just a blanket obligation. It's actually very psychological halachas, because it says there, and I'll just point out two key interesting things. So the law goes that you're supposed to ask forgiveness of someone you've hurt. And if they don't respond to you, you have to ask a second time and a third time. And then there's what happens after 3 times if they don't respond. But your obligation continues always, but you don't have to necessarily approach them again. The one who's been wronged has an obligation to forgive and not be cruel, akhzari, and say, no, I don't want to forgive. There are 2 exceptions. If the person who's been wronged feels that the person who did the wrong needs their heart broken more, so they're able to withhold forgiveness if they feel that the other person needs to more introspection, or if by forgiving the other person you get hurt in the process. Which gives a direct answer, again, somewhat tangentially, to people who ask the question, do I have to forgive abusive parents? Or other people who've perpetrated abuse against me? The answer is very direct. Does it hurt you if it continues to hurt you by forgiving, you don't need to do that, because you have to take care of your life first. And sometimes forgiving can be hurtful to yourself for many reasons. But a point I want to make is, why should one be obligated to forgive? What happens if the crime was a very serious crime that's caused you forever, damaged you for the rest of your life? Or I could say damaged, hurt you the rest of your life. So the interesting thing here, the word mechila, in Hebrew means, mechila comes also from the root machal. Machal also means a circle. So a circle, what's the connection to a circle? When 2 people who care about each other, or love each other, or just have even a normal relationship, so there's a complete circle. The 2 people are connected in a complete circle. When there's a breach of trust, a betrayal, some form of abuse or hurt, the circle is broken. Mechila completes the circle again. It fixes, it mends the puncture, the schism that's created. So the interesting thing about forgiveness, it's not about the other person, it's about you. When you're able to forgive, and this is very contemporary in therapy, where people who've hurt individuals, they're taught that one of your healing is to forgive, not to forgive and to call the other person and say, by the way, I forgive you as if it didn't happen. They may never even know you forgive. You're forgiving yourself. And you're forgiving the crime because you don't want their presence in your life anymore. In other words, mechila is not just about you reciprocating. Okay, that person asked you for forgiveness, now you're reciprocating. That may be the case in some instances, but there's something much more profound. You're freeing yourself and you're completing your own circle. Because if you don't, you're always haunted by that which was done to you. And that's ultimately why vengeance, feelings of vengeance, or other negative feelings, ultimately are not about the other person. It's not like, oh, let's stop being angry at the Nazis, or it's not about them. But they did, and they deserve everything they get for it, or more. It's about you. Will your life, the rest of your life, be consumed with that which was done to you, which essentially turns you into a victim that continues on. Many Holocaust survivors have this issue. They continue to be victims psychologically and emotionally to what happened to them. I'm not judging them, by no means. I'm not in their shoes. I can't even imagine it. So this is not about judgment, but the fact of the matter is, it does consume them. The darkness continues to dominate. So what's the solution to that? The solution is that you have to fill your life with light. Because it's about your life. And your life will be destroyed if you continue to dwell and be consumed and obsess over that which was done to you. So the only solution is to channel it into something that is equally powerful. And this is the ultimate Jewish response. And I'm speaking now on the microcosmic level. I'll get to the vengeance and avenging blood like in Israel or the Nazis or so on. We'll discuss that in a few minutes. But on a personal level, the way is like this. Any energy, whether it's negative or positive, is intense. The most intense energy probably in existence is anything related to pain, loss, grief, vengeance, anger. Negative stuff, negative feelings. Where do I take that from? Well, from different studies. One of them, I mentioned it a number of weeks ago, a number of times. I remember I was in Lima, Peru, a number of years ago. There was a conference on happiness. And so there was a professor there, I forgot his name. I've written it in my articles on the web. And myself, he spoke more on a secular, psychological level. I spoke from a Torah point of view, also psychological. And he mentioned something interesting, that studies show that if you lose $1,000 and then you gain $1,000, the 1,000 you've gained does not counteract the pain of losing 1,000. You have to gain 4,000. Why is that the case? Because negative experiences impact us more than positive ones. So for every negative experience, you need something 3 or 4 times as much to counter that. That's studies show. I didn't confirm it and verify it, but it's interesting. It makes sense if you think about it, because you see, when someone does a favor for you, you'll be happy, you'll be gratified, you'll be thankful. But is it as powerful as the anger you have when somebody hurts you? Most likely not. In other words, one thank you and one insult don't cancel each other out. You need 4 thank yous for every insult. I don't know if that's a formula we should be using, but you get the idea. The point I'm making here is that that negative feelings are very intense energy. But let's think of it like negative energy. You don't see it quite the way you see positive energy. You know, physics today has been proven there's a thing called a black hole. You've heard of a black hole, right? So I gave a class about this, I think Hanukkah time or last winter, about the black hole psychological. There's also a black hole. It's called depression. It's called any negative feeling. Now, black holes, as you may know, were first predicted by Einstein. Then he actually retracted it, and then it was proven anyway in the last 2 decades. What are black holes? Black holes are intense stars that the gravitational pull of the star is so powerful, it doesn't even allow light to escape. Like Earth, for example, there's gravity. But gravity has a certain measure. Gravity on the moon, for example, is less. That's why you saw the astronauts bouncing around on the moon. They bounced around, but there's some places there's zero gravity in outer space. On Earth there's gravity, but the gravity does not suck everything. For example, helium defies gravity. Even a simple flame defies gravity. Just light a flame. You'll see the flame goes upward. If the gravity was so strong, it wouldn't allow it to go up. But in a black hole, the intensity of the gravity is so powerful, it doesn't allow anything to go out, even light. So when you look at the skies, you can't see a black hole. So how do we know it exists? can't see it. How do you know it exists? No one ever landed there. The answer is, we see its impact on its surroundings. We see there are instruments that show that there's a certain area in space that's being affected, bodies are moving in strange ways. So you know, like think of it like a magnet. You don't see the magnet, but you see things around it like moving back and forth. So you realize there must be something that's affecting them. And when you study it long enough, you start seeing patterns. And you identify the black hole not by seeing it, but by not seeing it. You identify by its impact. It's like almost seeing a shadow, but not the light. What is that psychologically speaking? You can't see the energy of anger. I mean, I'm not talking about rage where it's expressed, but the internal energy, when someone's angry inside, or vengeance, or any type of feeling within that really consumes you. Yeah, sometimes someone can read your body language, you can see your face, but you can also hide it. But the intensity of the energy is so powerful that you don't really recognize it. So, when there's grief or any type of pain or loss, what is the Jewish approach? Is how do you tap this energy in a positive way? It's still energy. It's just energy that's imploding instead of exploding. It's energy that's going within instead of going outward. I'll use a perfect example from my own personal example, which I know worked because it happened to me. My father, I mentioned it very often, but to me it's a tremendous lesson in grief, in grieving after death. My father passed away a little more than 9 years ago. Okay. Now, the loss of a parent is a very serious, maybe for me, the most definitive experience of my life, more than many other things, in its own way. Maybe because a parent goes back all the way to the deepest unconscious of your life, from the times you don't even remember. Like your little baby is not even going to remember these moments, as we don't remember. So something connected very deep way. It's like your foundations. And this is, by the way, whether it's a parent that was healthy or not healthy, or a parent that was good to you or not good to you, it has an impact. As a matter of fact, a parent that was abusive has its own story. In my case, my father was a great man, was a beautiful man. I was a friend of mine as well. So there was loss, like no one should ever know. And I remember, because I have 4 siblings, we're 5 altogether. I'm the oldest, and I saw everyone dealt with it. I studied it. Since I studied human nature, I studied myself as well. The Shiva time, the year, the 30 days, the year, the first year, and then as time passed on. So these things don't go away. As someone told me when I sat Shiva, I remember, and again, I'm sorry for bringing up a negative topic, but I'm mentioning it simply because I think it could be helpful to all of us. Someone told me, it was the only thing I remember from all the things people said, was that it's like a hole in your heart when someone close passes away. Like a hole in your living room. And you keep falling into it until one day you learn to walk around it. I found that to be extremely true. In other words, it doesn't go away. You just learn to walk around it. And then if you need, you can elicit that hole anytime because it's always there. It's just you've learned to walk around it. It's God's mysterious ways of healing. But I remember my father was a journalist, publisher, editor of a newspaper, Allgemeine Journal. And I remember literally when we were driving back from the funeral, so I said to my siblings, we're all in one car, one minivan, whatever. And I said, even though I have a full-time job and I was not interested in doing anything, I said, I take upon myself to continue this newspaper. Because I just felt, I didn't want to, I said, if we want to kill it, let's kill it. But don't let it die by default. That was my attitude. I didn't believe in things just dying out. Things you can't control, you can't control. My siblings thought I was nuts. They said, let's sit Shiva, and then afterwards we'll think about this. Who's thinking about this, right, coming from a funeral? Anyway, I said, you could do what you want. I'm doing what I want. And everybody's fine, And it was just completely impulsive. It wasn't even, I didn't think it through. I wouldn't have done it if I did. And I continue till this day. It's almost 10 years, 9 years. Completely insane, to be very honest. I'm not going to go into the details of how insane. But trust me, it was not irrational. But I will tell you one thing. I was able to channel grief in a way I never could imagine. Because of all the headaches of this paper and raising the money, whatever had to be done required energy. And the grief for my father's loss was directly channeled in walking in his footsteps and continuing something that was his whole entire life. It wasn't my entire life. I have a whole life of my own. My work, my writing, and so on, my teaching. So it wasn't like I needed it for my for edification or something. But it was an unbelievable experience. It wasn't my intention, actually. But it ended up happening. Total channeling of grief. And I saw very vividly, very different way, I and my siblings grieved. I'm not taking away, maybe they found their ways. So I use this as an example. Anyone that's ever in a situation, I say you have to do something in the honor and spirit of that parent, not just a nice little charity. Do something passionate, because then the energy of the grief is still accessed, but is being directed. Instead of it killing you or hurting you, it ends up becoming a force that brings light. It's like fuel. Fuel is fuel. Who cares whether it's painful wood or joyous wood, if you know what I'm saying? Can you find out what's going on there? The bottom line is fuel. And that's the Jewish way in channeling anger, in channeling passion. So now let's go back to maybe the best study of all is the Holocaust itself. Because it's in our time. But it will reveal for us the Jewish attitude, because it wasn't just the Nazis and the Germans. We're talking before that were the Cossacks and the pogroms. Before that were the Inquisition and the Spanish. Before that, the Roman Christian Crusaders. And before that, we have to deal with the Babylonians and the Persians and the Greeks and the Modai, what do they call them? Whatever you call them. And the Egyptians, of course. So we have a whole slew of empires that didn't treat us exactly perfectly. But what happened after the Holocaust? Okay. So we all know what we feel like when we hear the stories of what was happened. How innocent Jews were killed for simply one reason. Can you... So you'd think this be completely justified. I don't know if you know the story with that just was revealed a few decades ago. When was it? In 2001, I think, of a group of American army when they saw in Dachau what the Nazis did. So they just, without any due process, just shot the Germans who were coming back and surrendering. They just shot them dead. And later it was a whole thing, because it was not appropriate. This was Americans who just could not stand what they saw. So it would be completely justified, like in historian history, nation after nation, what did they do as soon as they had power? Israel has a powerful army, to go bomb the hell out of the Germans. How come no Jew called for such vengeance? I don't know even of one. I'm not suggesting there aren't individuals. You see what happened last week in Israel. I'm not saying over history you don't have individuals who definitely did that, but it's not a collective Jewish approach. At the same time, we're not believers in looking the other way as if it didn't happen. There was a big debate in the 50s whether the Jews should take the reparations that the Germans were offering. Talking about billions of dollars. There was a whole many group of Holocaust survivors who said absolutely not. You don't give them, they're going to buy us off with money after what they did. They didn't want to give. And others said, take the money and run. Who cares what they think? Bottom line is we can use the money to build organizations, to do all kinds of things. They're anyway going to think that whatever they think. The latter party won out for whatever reason. It was a practical approach, basically. The point is that you can imagine, I'm not a Holocaust survivor directly, but I have family members. And, as a Jew, I know what would have happened, as all of us know, if we were in 1940, 1935, in the wrong time, in the wrong place, where you'd be. So we all understand very clearly what happened. And I don't think there's a Jew on earth that does not have some tinge of feeling, probably much more than that, when you read the stories, when you hear about it. And yet, what do you see predominantly? With all the pain and grief, what happened was, as many Holocaust survivors will say it openly, our vengeance, I've heard this, I heard it specifically from his name was Abraham Zuckerman. He was actually one of the Schindler's List. He just passed away this year. He told me one of the reasons he survived because his name was Zuckerman. So he ended up always at the bottom of the list, Z. So by the time they got to him, okay, well, anyway, he told me. Remember, he was a photographer, like an amateur photographer. So he has a lot of albums. He opens up his albums. This is my vengeance, and he shows his grandchildren, great grandchildren, and you hear this time and time again. This is what the Jews did when they were in Egypt. Kashayano esam ken yirbe v'chen yifretz. As they were oppressed, in direct measure, they proliferated and they thrived. Because whether it was either from a divine grace, that's something in the Jewish neshama that knows this instinctively, or it was just the wisdom of Jews who understood this with logic, for somebody they knew that at the end of the day, you can never explain away pain and loss, and all your anger and all your vengeance is going to go to naught because it doesn't achieve anything. And that you have to take some of the energy, at least, if not all of it, and direct it into building something. That doesn't redeem it, but at least allows us to be sane and move on. And that's the story of the Jewish people. No other nation was ever able to do that, because they were too consumed with their own egos, whereas the Jews realized that perpetuating our people. And this begins back to Abraham. When Abraham, God says, a man who's dedicating his entire life and his children, his family, his home, to perpetuate tzedakah and mishpat, charity and justice. And at the time, it wasn't exactly a popular thing to do. You're talking about a pagan world of barbarians that weren't interested in perpetuating anything outside of their own self-interest. One man, Echad Hayavram, stood up like that. And you think at the time, everybody would have said he's crazy. He's insane. Look at what some Jews, how Jews are berated if someone gets up in a law firm and proudly says, I'm Jewish, even today, let alone then. He was all alone. And this man single-handedly changed the world. Wow, perfect timing. I feel like a call from Abraham, What did he do? 4 billion people on this planet today, 2.5 billion Christians, and 1.5 billion Muslims, and numbers-wise at least, the paltry 14 million Jews, I don't know the percentage of that, all see Abraham as the first prophet, as the man, the father of monotheism, the father of tzedakah and mishpat, which has now become the norm in this world in which we live, which was not the case. It took thousands of years. Because that's what they did. They knew how to channel the grief. We left Egypt. The strongest term the Torah says is we'll never go back to Egypt. That's about it. It doesn't say go back and exact revenge when you get to the promised land and go back and attack Egypt. The revenge is simple. That we won't just survive, we'll thrive. And what happened to all those empires? Without any revenge, without any wars, they all disappeared anyway. So it's an interesting take on the whole thing. So when you talk about events, let's say, going on in Israel now, trust me, I forced myself to watch. I don't even want to say this. I hope nobody shrieks. I forced myself to watch a few years ago a beheading done by some Muslims. It was online. I wanted to just see it simply because I wanted to get my blood boiling, to be honest. And then I saw how they played soccer with a head from a IDF soldier that was taken hostage and then killed. Do you ever see, is such a concept possible that you know any Jews that would do such a thing? And I'm not defending and saying what happened this past week, I find problematic, even though it's a problem to criticize it as well, because, so the Arabs can kill innocent students and Jews can't kill innocent. We still know it's a higher standard and we shouldn't be doing that. I have no question about it. Am I going to go condemn it and feed Muslim propaganda? I don't know if I'll do that. But some things you have to wash through laundry privately. But between us, it's not so between us. It's all being broadcast. But so it's off the record. But it's on the record, and I'm off the record, if you know what I mean. Obviously, it's not the Jewish way. It's just not the way we didn't do things that way. Why? Not because we don't have anger. Not because we're just like peaceful lambs that just look the other way. No, because we take the energy and we translate it into what? Into a renaissance of Jewish life. You want vengeance against the Nazis? You go to Jerusalem on a Saturday night Forget about now the religious status, the spiritual status, whether they're thinking about God. But just to see the restaurants, the bars, full with Jews that the Nazis felt one day would just be a museum piece because they killed them all, and where they are, wherever they are, and any grandchild of a Nazi in Germany is burying his head because they don't want anyone to know their origins, that to me is vengeance. You go to Berlin on Hanukkah, and you look at the Brandenburg Gate. Yeah, the gate where Hitler stood with his 200,000 legions of Jugendrat, his young Nazis. You know, those where he made those declarations. There are videos of it. You go to that gate, what does it look like today in Hanukkah? There's a big menorah standing where he stood. And the Christmas tree is on the right. And when I asked the rabbi, Techtel, who's the rabbi there, said, how'd you get that pulled off? How'd you pull off that the menorah is in the center and the Christmas tree on the right? So he said, I convinced the curator, the guy who takes care of the place, that for aesthetic looks, the menorah looks good in the middle and the Christmas tree in the right, just for the design. Anyway, that is vengeance. And when you see little boys running around in Berlin with yarmulkes and tzitzis and so on, that's our vengeance. Not that we want to do it to stick it in their face. That's not the point. It's we move on. You're not going to control our lives. We may have suffered, but we're not sufferers. And let us see who will prevail. Tonight is Yud Beis Tammuz. It's a Hasidic holiday by Chabad especially. But, okay. So, Gavriel Zalman is taking leave. Okay. If he has any comments on my class, let me know later. Okay, good. I'm sure he's probably listening better than all of us. That's how it is. There's no resistance on that stage of life. What's going on? Party? Anyway, so to Yud Beis Tammuz, Yud Gimel Tammuz, what is it? In 1927, the previous Chabad Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson, was arrested. Now, 1927, if you do a little study of what the Soviet Union was like, we're talking right after the Bolshevik Revolution, and right when Stalin came to power. Now, if you know anything about Joseph Stalin, you'll know he was a pretty good match for his counterpart in Germany, Hitler. He murdered, they say, 30 million people, except it wasn't with numbers and so organized as Germans are. Not the Yekish style, the Russian style, by hunger or the other ways that he did. Now, the Jews, for some reason, are always a thorn in everybody's side, and the Nazis, there's communists, and especially the Yevsektia, which was the Jewish branch, Jewish communists, were the worst of them all. They could not stand religion, and they want to eradicate it in every possible way. Now you have to remember, just to give you a little background, you're dealing with, some people say 10 million Jews were in Russia in the beginning of the 20th century. It could be even more. No one will ever know. There was no real census taken. But basically American Jews, the first immigration in the early 20th century, came due to the pogroms in Eastern Europe and primarily in Russia, in Kishinev and so on. And that's where they were coming from. The Jews, for example, in Poland or in Hungary or in the other countries, the immigration wasn't until after World War II. Most came from Eastern Europe, mostly Russia. And then, of course, the second immigration after World War II. So the situation there was completely dire. You're talking about a nation like the Soviet Union went to war against religion, against Judaism particularly. In the Marx's words, religion is the opiate of the masses. And there were big arguments. What do you do? God forbid, I don't even want to. Al tiftach peh. I don't even want to mention it. But think of a thriving community in the United States, 5.5 million Jews, and suddenly the government closes everything down: kosher, synagogues, circumcision, slaughter, shechita, everything, schools. So there were all kinds of debates. There were rabbis said it's time to leave. Problem was, not everybody could just pick up and leave. They didn't let everybody leave. Anyway, the Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson, who was a Baal Mesiras Nefesh, a person who sacrificed his life for Judaism. His father, by the way, Rabbi Rashab, was already dealing with these challenges, but it was still Tsarist Russia primarily. And his colleague was Reb Chaim Brisker. So though they came from different persuasions, Litvish and Chassidish, but it came to lives of Jews, they worked very closely together in that period. This is pre-1920. I would say in the late 19th century, beginning of the 20th century. I don't know what year Reb Chaim passed away. But the previous, so Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak was arrested for his counter-revolutionary activity. Now, being arrested then was basically death. There was no due process. There was no court cases. There was nothing. There was a prosecutor. You either confessed or they killed you anyway, either way. And then they sent a bill for the bullet to your family. That was what was done. You can imagine with him, with the Rebbe, they really tortured him. And it was primarily the Jewish communists that did so. And he wrote actually a whole yoman, a diary, of what transpired while he was in prison, which lasted from Tezvav Sivan to Yud Beis Tammuz, would be almost a month. But a month in the hell. He actually called a tractate from hell, Masechta Gehenim. That's what he calls his diary. Imagine, Masechta Gehenim. Describes the situation there. And he was not dealing with exactly friendly... But many of those Jews happened to be grandchildren of Chassidim. So they spoke in Yiddish, and they knew what a Rebbe was. As a matter of fact, when they came to arrest him, one of them said to him, Rebbe, let me in Yiddish, let me carry your bags, like my grandfather carried your grandfather's bags. So he said, your grandfather carried my grandfather's bags where my grandfather wanted to go. And you want to carry my bags where you want me to go, and not. Anyway, there's many exchanges. The ones that I want to mention, there was a man called Lulav, that was his name. He was one of the very vicious Jewish communists. And he would have these very audacious conversations, chutzpah conversations with the Rebbe. Though the Rebbe was fluent in Russian, he would not speak Russian. He chose, as he writes in his diary, I made a decision from the second I entered prison, for my own well-being and for my own psychological well-being, I will not cooperate with anything. I am going to stand proud of who I am without any compromise. That was the bottom line, which was putting himself in grave danger, but he needed to do that, and he did it. He spoke Yiddish. When he wanted to daven, he insisted on praying. He wanted his tefillin, which was insane, basically, if you think about it. Insanity of Kedusha, Shtus the Kedusha. But that's what he did. So Lulav put a gun to his head once and said, Rebbe, enough of the games here. This object here has tamed and made many people cooperate. And the Rebbe turned to him and looked at him and said, without flinching, this toy, he said, this tzatzke, that's the word he used, this toy can frighten someone that has one world and many gods, but not someone who has one God and many worlds. So Lulav got so furious, he said to him, Rebbe, we'll see who's going to prevail. And the Rebbe said, yeah, mivel zen ver vemen. We will see who will prevail. Lulav was killed within another month or two, which would happen to anyone there anyway. That was Stalin's philosophy. You kill everybody just to drive fear into everyone. And the Rebbe came out of prison. Not only came out of prison, he came out of Russia, which was a miracle by itself. And we celebrate it till this day. To me, just that moment captures the essence of Jewish fortitude. That he could stand with a gun to his head. It's not like we embrace death. We're not a culture of death. It's not like he wanted to die. But he said to him, the essence of all of Judaism, you can frighten someone that has one world and many gods, because one world, you kill the person, he's dead. That's it. It's over. Finality. You can't frighten someone that has many worlds, which means many levels of reality. I'm physically, you take me. I still have a soul. I still have Chassidim. I still have a Torah. I still have generations that will come after me. That's what the Jews always knew. That is why they had the ability, the presence. How would you explain to someone, a skeptic, that says to you, how could the Jews have say Kaddish, say Shema, even sing Ani Mamin, that I believe in complete faith, even though you may tarry, Mashiach. Sing it in the concentration camps, as witnesses testified. You would think in the concentration camps they should be furious at God for forsaking them, for letting them be tortured and dehumanized just simply because they're Jewish, and for allowing such enemies, haters of God, to be such masters. So how could they just have that presence and ignore all that and just say, thank you, God? You ever think about it? So you either say, if you were an objective skeptic, you'd say they're either crazy and denial, they're escaping into religious fantasies, and don't even know their own reality, or something else. Now we know it's not the first, because you're not talking about crazy people. You're talking about very intelligent people. And the answer is very simple. There's a story they tell, I don't know if it's true or not, but I heard it. There was a Nazi about to kill a Jew, and the Jew asked if he could say something. He wanted to say his last vidui, prayer, his last confession, whatever. He started saying something, muttering something, and the Nazi said, what are you saying? He says, I'm thanking my God. What are you thanking God for, you miserable Jew? You're about to be killed. I'm in control here. You should be angry. He says, I'm thanking God for creating me not like you. That's what they say. And you have many stories like this, because here's the story. They weren't in denial at all. They were saying, you can kill our bodies, but you can't kill our souls. You can kill our lives. You can take our lives, but you can't take our faith. And if it won't be us, it'll be our children. And if it won't be our children, it'll be our grandchildren. Jews always knew this. We say it in every night of Pesach, V'hisha amdalanu, Chol dor v'dor, in every generation. But the vague vihi means what? Faith, amunah, or the promise, the haftacha that God gave. And that has prevailed. Now, this would all be nice theories that would not be proven if I said this 3,000 years ago, 4,000 years ago. But it's easy to say today because history testifies to all of this. This is what Jews did with their anger. This is what they did with their vengeance. Yes, it's a vengeance, but it's a very different type of vengeance. It's not stooping, an eye for an eye. You kill me, I'll kill you. This doesn't mean we're defenseless. We absolutely go to war. Jacob prepared with a prayer and prepared a gift to appease Esau, and he prepared for war. He needed only 2 out of 3. So it's not like we don't know what war means, but that's the last resort. The key is that we came to this world, and we know this, that human beings were sent to this world to make this world into a divine home. That's the purpose of existence. That never changes. The fact that Rishonim govern by, that we live in a world where the wicked prosper, and where at times, unfortunately, more often than not, throughout history, these wicked not only prospered, but they destroyed everything that's pure and innocent, does not allow us to compromise our vision. Imagine, you're going toward a direction, a goal. You're going to rebuild a third temple. You're going to bring a messianic world of peace and harmony. And that's your vision. So suddenly you're hijacked, and you're arrested, or you're even killed, part of us, some of us, in this journey. So you could say, you know what, I'm giving up. Or, it's never going to happen. The Jews knew that cannot, because if they did that, then the enemy will have really won. Because then they will have won and destroyed our vision, destroyed our hope, everything we paid our prices for. Jews, I know this even unconsciously. I've talked to very secular Jews. I deal primarily with secular Jews more than religious. And as secular as they are, you get to that point, every Jew knows this. Knows that we will not give up on certain hopes just because. I was just listening yesterday on a video in the Knesset. I got to tell you this, it's very interesting. In the Knesset yesterday was a tribute to the Lubavitcher Rebbe, whose 20th yahrzeit was last week. So they had Knesset members speaking. Okay, the prerequisite, you usually hear the different things people say. Fine. So I thought, I was just listening to hear if I hear some nice story or something interesting. Nothing. It was all nice. Then suddenly a guy gets up. Actually, before he gets up, the chairman there was sitting and calling up different Chavrei Knesset members. And he calls up a guy called I forgot his name. You can look it up. As he's walking to the podium, he signals something to the chairman, and the chairman says, the communist member of the Knesset, and says his Hebrew name. He insists calling himself the communist. Okay, so you're wondering what's a communist member of the Knesset getting up and honoring the Lubavitcher Rebbe? So he starts talking about it. He says, you probably all know that I'm not exactly a chassid. More than just not a chassid. He's a communist. He's pro-Arab. he says, so why did I ask to speak? He says, because firstly, I'm a grandson of the Baal HaTanya, the Alter Rebbe. My grandfather's name was Shneir Zalman. And I have many family members that are Chabad. Then he got heckled. Knesset is like the British Parliament. So people heckle you. So people started heckling him, I guess. That's what it turned out, a communist in the Knesset, a grandson of the Baal HaTanya. I mean, he didn't react. He just made with his face, whatever. Anyway, he continues on. I'm interested, what is this guy's going to say? He says, so I'm not here to speak because he's my grandfather, and I'm a family member with the Rebbe, but rather because something that I'll never forget, one of the most, what was the word, momentous, speaking in Hebrew, momentous events in my life was something my grandfather told me. So my grandfather had this glow on his face. He had always a glow on his face. And he told me once the following. He said that remember, wherever you go in life, there's always a spark of good in everything. See, so even though we disagree here in the Knesset about many things, and we may argue and we may fight, but we have to always remember there's a spark of good in everything. He says, that's what I wanted to share, and he sat down. So look, you could look at this cynically, or I found it to be quite intriguing. I mean, if you're a communist member in the Knesset, you can imagine he's always voting against whatever Israel is interested in. And he should say this. I found it to be something intriguing. Then you go back and you think about how many communists were Jews, and how many other isms. Marx himself was a Jew. And, on one hand you could say, look how, Jews, they either go one extreme or the other. Either they're the holiest, like Moses, or they're the worst. Or you could say something else. That sometimes a Jew who may not have the knowledge and education, but yet there's an instinct in him of a utopian and better world. And maybe they didn't know how to integrate it with religion and faith and God. So it turned into socialism, into secular Zionism, into Yiddishism. So though I'm not in any way condoning necessarily these movements, but there's a spark of good in them as well, because it's coming from a person who wants to change the world and doesn't know how. And you see this time and again. So even in the most distorted or bizarre forms, it's still that instinct, not just for survival, but we're going to change the world at the end of the day. Now honestly, I don't know if I'll be able to give this talk 3,000 years ago. It'd be hard probably, but today it happened. This attitude of taking all that happened to us, and no nation suffered like the Jews. We have more reason to be angry and vengeful, to avenge the innocent blood. They say there's more Jewish blood in European rivers than water. We're not going to get into what's going on in the Vatican mausoleums and library there, what they have of the Jewish cities and books and manuscripts and probably Holy Temple vessels as well. And yet we took all the vengeance and anger and all that and turned it into what? Turned it into building temples. Turned it into, look, Rashi, the Ramban, the Rashba. I mean, you're talking about giants. What did they take? They were living in the belly of the beast. They weren't living on the Riviera. They were living in middle of massacres, in middle of pogroms. The presence of mind to write these masterpieces, the scholarship. And above all, the war for justice and goodness and kindness. Today there's distortions. Jews consider themselves, many American Jews consider themselves liberals. There's a little distortion. Jews are always liberal. You know what? In social life they were liberal. Charitable, gemachs, and so on. They were always conservative politically, but liberal in social action. Okay, so today some people also are politically liberal. Got a little wrong in some areas. But the point that I'm making here is that we took all the negative, the black hole, and turned it into an enormous amount of energy. And the little numbers that we have, we've done more for the world than any nation, especially compared to the numbers. Not getting now into Nobel Prizes and the other stuff. In every American United States regime, you have at least 1 million of Jews in the cabinet and the advisors and so on and so forth. So, if you want to accuse me of being a proud Jew, go ahead, because that's exactly what I'm doing. I'm pulling rank in a real way because I think we have a lot to teach the world. Not, God forbid, in a condescending way. I don't think the mission of the Jew is to be insulated. It's a light unto nations. We have to teach the world how you take anger and vengeance and all the feelings that we're discussing and turn them into positive stuff. That's what we need to do. Ultimately, I remember a few years ago, I don't like to speak bignusan shel Yisrael, but I want to just say, it just struck me. Israel was working with PR firms in the United States to polish up their image here. So someone came up with a brilliant idea, quote unquote brilliant. Since there's so many beautiful Jewish women in Israel and model types, so why don't we just make a major campaign, since Americans are very into the sex appeal, we'll make a major campaign of beautiful Jewish women, whether it's in bikinis or whatever it is, and plaster the whole United States. This will raise the image of Israel in the mind of Americans. So first of all, there are a lot of American beautiful women too. So that I don't know if they need Israel for that, but that was in their mind. It didn't really work because they paid millions of dollars for this campaign and didn't catch on. But I was saying to myself, Havdil, in contrast, there's a pasuk, Kimitzian Seitzer Teira Dvar Hashem Yerushalayim. What the world wants is that Israel would be the spiritual paragon and model of what it means to change a world with a spiritual vision. I guarantee you, if Israel exported that would change the perception. For whatever reason, and again, I don't want to speak negatively, but I have to say this, for whatever reason, and the real reason is because the leaders themselves are ignorant, Israel is the center of the universe. I'll be honest. For this little country the size of New Jersey, it takes up a lot more headlines than any other place of the world. Every few years, tragically, there's another eruption. Jerusalem is still being fought over by everybody, Christians, Muslims, and of course Jews. And it doesn't go away. What's the attraction? The attraction is go to the Kotel any given day in the year, and you'll see, besides for the thousands of Jews that gather there, you'll find thousands of Americans from Oklahoma and Texas and Kansas and so on. And when you ask them, and as I have done, what are you doing here? This is the promised land. This is God's promised land that He gave to the chosen people. Millions of Americans think this way, especially from the evangelical circles. I know some Jews are queasy about it, but I don't know if you remember a number of years ago there was 60 Minutes did a episode about it, and they asked one of the rabbis, they said, you know why so many Christian evangelicals and the Christian right are so pro-Israel? Because they see it as part of the double prophecy. That first Jews will return to Israel, then that other Jew, Jesus, will come back, and then all the Jews will be eliminated. So the rabbi answered wisely. He says, you know what? We still are friends with them, because let them support them. Then we'll worry about what happens in second stage. Which of course is fine. Reminds me, I think I mentioned this here a number of times. I once spoke. I was on a plane and I met this Methodist minister, and it was a long story. But bottom line, we were having this conversation. I asked him about what he thinks about. He was Protestant, so what do you think about the Pope? So he says, we're Protestants. We don't really follow the relics, and the Pope is not, it's just a human being. He's not. And this is what his words. His words were, we don't believe in intermediaries. We pray to Jesus directly. So I said to him, oh, yeah, I went to yeshiva with that guy. So he said, what? I said, yeah, we went to the same yeshiva, we studied the same Gemara, the same Talmud. Why'd you choose him from the whole class? So after a few minutes, he got to, what I was trying to say. So I thought he'd be insulted. After we get off the plane, he says to me, I like you. Maybe you'd come speak for our community one of these days. So I gave my number. I thought I'd never hear from him. Well, I did. A number of months later, he called me. He says that they have this biannual conference of Methodist and Presbyterian ministers in New Jersey. Would I speak? And the host called me. So first, my initial reaction is, what do I need this for? But then second thought, I said to myself, okay. But I made two conditions. Number one, there should be no PR. He asked me why. I said, because I think some of my colleagues may not appreciate it exactly. And secondly, I want to speak in a social hall, which was finally acceptable. And my topic they gave me was the Jewish view on Messiah and redemption. And no censorship. I could say whatever I want, and I did. I spoke about Maimonides' description of a world that does not necessarily need supernatural change, that the involvement of the world will be not for material pursuits, but for spiritual. A world filled with divine knowledge as the waters cover the sea. All the nations will be at peace. Az epech al amim. And I explained it according to mystical teachings. Essentially a world of higher consciousness, higher awareness. And dedicated to higher ends, knowing God instead of just self-interest. After my talk, the host got up, thanked me, and said, very nice, eloquent words. However, you say there'll be peace then. How will we ever come to peace with you Jews? You unequivocally reject the Messiah that we believe in. What do you say? So you pray to God that God should put the right words in your mouth. And these are the words I said. I said, well, let's put it this way. The Messiah will be one Jew or another. And the whole place awkwardly laughed, and they accepted it. The point I want to make is that they chose a Jew, which I find always very ironic. A Jew that probably would be today here wouldn't be accepted in most of those country clubs, and would be massacred with other Jews in the Holocaust. I'm not defending this individual, but I just find that to be a little ironic twist in history. But Maimonides does say, Rambam, Maimonides was subject, as many Hebrew books, Torah books, in the Middle Ages to censorship. So there's Maimonides, the end of Maimonides that talks about the Messiah, some of it was censored. But we have the original edition. Again, ironically, the original edition is the Roman edition. The the Rome edition says the following, that after he talks about Christianity and Islam, with all the expressions he uses there, he says that despite all their flaws, the metomim deis Hashem, God's mysterious ways, that he allowed these religions to proliferate, to bring the word of the belief in Mashiach and unity to every part of the world, even the farthest islands. That's what Maimonides writes. It's a pretty radical statement to write 1,000 years ago, but it goes back to what I was saying before. Our greatest vengeance is when the world will be not just respect the Jew, but the world will be transformed in the vision that Abraham had for a world of real peace. That's our ultimate revenge. I remember when my book, Toward a Meaningful Life, was published. It's 19 years ago. I was in England a year later, or 2 years later. So there was a British edition released, and I was invited to speak. Also, Chief Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, who just recently retired, was also there. And he said the following. He spoke before he introduced me, and he said, I want to introduce him, Rabbi Jacobson, with a question to him. He says, I read your book, Toward a Meaningful Life, a beautiful book about life and about how to make a life more meaningful. But there's not one word of a mitzvah in that whole entire book. Conceivable that a book based on Torah should have not mitzvah, no studying Torah, no mezuzah, no kashrus, no Shabbos. That was his question to me. So I said, it's a very good question. You can imagine it wasn't like a mistake or something. It's not like I forgot that there's 613 mitzvahs or so on. But I want to answer with something you, Rabbi Sachs, once said. He said he was speaking at the Shloshim of the Lubavitcher Rebbe. That was 20 years ago. And he said that he always wondered why the Rebbe expended resources disproportionate to the population of Jews. If you're a person who wants to help Jewry, you go fishing where the fish are. Where are most Jews? New York, Tel Aviv, London, Paris, Melbourne, whatever, the different cities. Why send a Jew somewhere in Bangkok or some little other town to find another Jew just to give him a matzah? It seems like very scattered way of using your resources. You focus with the biggest bulk, and then you work your way out. Word. He says, I always wondered this, and now I think I have the answer. This was Jonathan Sachs in his talk. His answer, he says, was, after the Holocaust, when the Nazis hunted down every Jew in hate, hunted down every Jew in hate. You know the lengths they went. They used stethoscopes. You ever see those stethoscopes to find Jews hiding inside walls? You have to be completely obsessed. half Jews, quarter Jews, however they designate. The obsession they had to hunt down every single Jew. There's cities, if one Jew was there, they'd go back with an entire battalion just to find. So he says the Rebbe felt that if we don't hunt down Jews in love, with more passion than they hunted down the Jews in hate, they will have won. So it didn't matter where there were, how many where. It was about finding every single one. That's what he said. So I quoted him and I said, I think that the ultimate goal is even deeper than that. Not just that we hunt down every Jew with love, but we demonstrate to the world that both killed us, or was silent, which is also an accomplice to the crime, and show them not only are we still around, but the message of morality, of ethics, of charity, of justice, that we always believed in, will be embraced by you who tried to kill us all, or was silent in that death. Anyway, I remember Rabbi Sachs he's a very composed person. He doesn't get emotional. He got up. He was like, he said, absolutely. That's why I said when I wrote Toward a Meaningful Life, I started to write a book that wasn't just a book for Jews, a book to demonstrate the power of Torah for every human being on earth. Basically, an introduction to God and to morality based on Judaism for everyone. And then there's time to write a book for Jews. Anyway, he came over, he hugged me, embraced me, and it was a very moving moment. But I sincerely believe that, because that is ultimately not just our vengeance, that's our mission. And there's so many lessons to be learned from this. How you transcend your own pain. Everybody wants to know. How on a personal level, how can you transcend your own little pain, your wish that another person should be hurt because they hurt you? The answer is because your eyes are looking at a higher horizon of a bigger goal, and you don't let yourself be caught up in petty, low, and base instincts. You connect yourself to something that's greater. I'm not saying we could always do it, but that's what Judaism is there for. And to me, this is a source not just of pride. It's an honor. It's an unbelievable Ashreinu Matev Chalkenu, which means how precious is our legacy, that we have the ability to do so. So I find it something that I think that Jews themselves don't even appreciate. And some people bury themselves. They don't want anyone to recognize you're Jewish. What are you talking about? We're part of a nation that's here longer than anyone, that brought the most important values. And despite all the killings and all the genocides and the Holocausts, we're standing, maybe limping, maybe wounded, and we have the greatest light to bring to the world. This is, to me, the essence of it all. So, on this week of Pinchas and the Beis Tammuz and so on, I think that's something that we have to learn to embrace, and we have to learn to communicate. Whether it's with co-workers, whether it's in the businesses we work, whoever we go to, this is like a gift to share. The Medrash says that if the nations of the world knew how much the temple protected them, not only would they not have destroyed it, which next week we begin to honor, they would have surrounded it with legions and battalions to protect it. But they didn't know, at least consciously. So that's our job. And I think if Israel began to export that message, to say, we're a nation here almost 4,000 years old. We will teach the world, and not in an arrogant or condescending way. We will teach the world what it means to be just, what it means to be kind. At the same time, we're not pushovers. We have an army. We have our defenses. We know there are enemies around us. I have no doubt that the world would be changed, and Israel would be seen with such respect, even by the Muslim world, I would even say. Because they respect faith. They don't respect secularism. So to end on a concluding note, I know we started a little late, so I went a little over. I want to just say is that I think that these events going on in Israel, first of all, our prayers go out, obviously, that there should be no unnecessary pain and definitely no casualties. It's insane what's going on, and it just reminds you that it's a hotbed that is like a toxic kitchen. That all you need is a spark, but thank God we have a strong army and we have a strong attitude, and we've proven time and again that which doesn't kill us makes us stronger. So we should do what we have to do strongly and stand proud. It's an all other discussion, but our prayers go out to all of them, all our brethren there. But we have to do our part here, even though we're not living there necessarily, and I'm sure we send charity and so on, but also our part. There's Eretz Yisrael in each of us. Remember, the name Yisrael is the same name for every single Jew, for the nation of Israel, and for the land of Israel. It's all Yisrael. Sarisa im Elokim ki Sarisa im Elokim v'anoshim v'tuchal. Is the name that the angel of who? If you know who? Rome. The grandfather of Rome. The angel of Esav gave that name to Jacob. That you will prevail over all your enemies. You'll even prevail over the angels and over their spiritual powers. That's what the name Yisrael is. So our attitude isn't just one in Israel. There's Israel living right inside of us. That's why the land of Israel, the people of Israel, the Torah of Israel are all one. It's just a triangle. So when we strengthen our own Jewish pride, our own Jewish commitment, our sharing with others what it means to be Jewish in the global universal sense, what I'm describing here this evening, that in some way strengthens Israel too, in a spiritual sense. Obviously, strength comes in many different directions. Every military has many divisions, and one part of it is what we have to do on this end. So God should protect the land that He watches over from beginning of the year to the end. And may God protect us all here. But we shouldn't just be protection, we should thrive. And take any anger or vengeance we have and channel into spiritual revolution. So I thank you again for this, for your patience. Sorry again for the delays here. And may we have all a very peaceful and a elevated week. If you haven't left me your email address, please write it down so we could send you a weekly email and reminders of the class or any other way that I could help, or a Meaningful Life Center. Please don't hesitate to call upon us. And Philip, you're giving your class tomorrow evening? Okay. This is the Philip I always mention. Everyone thinks you don't exist. But here he is, in flesh and blood. The boogie woogie musical maestro. Creative spirituality. Philip Namworth.
When you finish, I'd like to make an announcement.
Okay. And we conclude until next Wednesday. Everyone have a very good week. Thank you very much.